long before anyone called it great. The idea of a wall was born not in peace, but in panic. Imagine ancient China, vast, splintered, and bloodied by war. This was the Warring States period, around the 5th century BC. 7 major kingdoms clawed at one another, trying to outmaneuver, outbuild, and outfight their neighbors. In this brutal arms race, walls weren't vanity projects, they were survival. Each state began raising barriers along its borders. These early defenses were crude, packed earth, wooden stakes, sometimes even trenches filled with sharpened bamboo. But they worked. Raiders were slowed, and armies had to think twice before charging in. States like Qin, Zhao, and Yan started experimenting with longer, higher walls, curling like dragons over ridges and across plains. They were less concerned with aesthetics than urgency. How fast could a wall go up before the next ambush came? To the west, nomadic tribes like the Xiongnu rode like ghosts across the steppe, striking swiftly and vanishing. These tribes didn't care about borders. To the sedentary states of China, they were a constant, terrifying mystery. Walls became more than just barricades. They were an attempt to draw a line between civilization and chaos. Where a wall ended, the known world ended too. No one yet imagined a single, unified wall. These barriers were piecemeal, like stitches on a wounded body. But the idea had taken root. If walls could hold off one enemy, maybe they could hold off them all. The soil of the northern frontier began to harden beneath human hands. Each kingdom poured effort and men into its own stretch of fortification, mostly using rammed earth, a simple yet powerful method where wet soil was pounded into wooden frames layer by layer. It sounds primitive, but a properly constructed rammed earth wall could last centuries, even withstanding rain and wind better than you'd expect. But these weren't peaceful construction projects. Labor was forced. Peasants, criminals, captured soldiers, anyone expendable, were rounded up and marched to the frontier. There they dug, carried, hauled, and died. For every yard of wall, countless lives were spent. Walls didn't just cut through landscapes. They cut through families, villages, futures. Despite their differences, these early walls shared two things: desperation and vision. Desperation to keep danger at bay, and vision of a safer, more controllable world. Kingdoms like Zhao and Yan began installing beacon towers, small, raised structures used to signal incoming threats with smoke by day and fire by night. It was a primitive but clever communication system, giving defenders valuable minutes, sometimes hours, to prepare. Even in its infancy, the wall was more than a fence. It was a nervous system, connecting far-flung outposts with the pulse of urgency. Then came Qin. The Qin kingdom, aggressive and methodical, had been studying its enemies closely. Its leader, a man named Yingxing, would soon do what no one else had: conquer all the warring states and declare himself the first emperor of China. But even before his empire had a name, he had ideas. Big ones. He saw walls not just as defense, but as unifiers. Not 7 fragments, but one continuous scar across the northern frontier. The seed of a colossal transformation had been planted. But for now, the earth still groaned under the strain of many walls, each one desperate, isolated, and doomed to change. By 221 BC, Yingxing had become Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a newly unified China. He was ruthless, brilliant, and obsessed with control. Where others saw borders as natural, he saw opportunities for reshaping. The northern frontier, long a patchwork of state-built defenses, offended his hunger for order. What use were fragments when he could forge one unbroken spine across his empire? The emperor's vision was audacious: link the scattered walls of the former states into one continuous barrier, stretching thousands of kilometers from the arid Gobi to the lush Lus Plateau. It wouldn't be pretty, and it didn't need to be. This was not architecture. It was domination written in dirt. To achieve it, Qin Shi Huang mobilized everything at his disposal: soldiers, peasants, criminals, scholars who spoke out of turn. This wasn't recruitment, it was conscription. Those who resisted were branded as enemies of the state. Families were ripped apart. Some workers were chained together, others marched with their own coffins. The work was harsh, remote, and punishing. Few ever returned home. But sheer manpower wasn't enough. The terrain itself fought back. The proposed route of the wall traversed mountains, deserts, rivers, and gorges. Tools were primitive, no cranes or iron machines, just ropes, wooden carts, baskets, and raw human effort. Rammed earth remained the primary material. In dry regions, workers shoveled loose soil into wooden frames, then hammered it down with stone clubs until it hardened like cement. In rocky areas, they quarried stone, dragging it up steep slopes inch by agonizing inch. Organization was brutal but efficient. Teams of laborers were overseen by soldiers who had permission to execute laggards. Supply chains stretched over hundreds of kilometers. To feed the workforce, nearby villages were drained of food, livestock, and manpower. The wall didn't just cost lives, it reshaped entire economies. Fields went untended. Markets emptied. The countryside whispered with resentment. Legends say that the dead were buried inside the wall. While not literally true, it captures the sentiment. So many perished, by exhaustion, exposure, disease, that their bones became part of the story. One of the most famous tales is that of Meng Jiangnu, a woman whose husband was conscripted and died building the wall. Her grief was so powerful, her cries supposedly caused a section of the wall to collapse, revealing his bones. The tale is myth, but its endurance tells us something. People didn't just fear the wall, they mourned it. Meanwhile, Qin Shi Huang rarely visited the construction sites. Instead, he sent emissaries, maps, and commands from his growing bureaucracy. The wall became a symbol of his rule, immense, impersonal, unstoppable. It was also a physical boundary between his empire and the steppe, between what he saw as order and what he feared as chaos. Ironically, the emperor's obsession with immortality outlived him. In 210 BC, he died during a tour of his empire, his body hidden in a cart of fish to prevent panic. Soon after, the Qin dynasty unraveled in civil war. The wall, incomplete and already weathering, stood abandoned in places. Yet the bones of his vision remained, stretched across the north, half covered in dust and myth. But the idea had been set in stone, literally and figuratively. Future dynasties wouldn't forget it. They would return, rebuild, and reimagine. Qin Shi Huang had done more than erect barriers. He had planted the idea that China could protect itself with a single line, one that could be redrawn, redefined, and reasserted for centuries to come. After Qin Shi Huang's death, dynasties rose and fell like waves. The Han came next, and while they didn't obsess over the wall quite like their predecessor, they maintained and extended parts of it, especially where the threat from the north, the Xiongnu, remained fierce. But over the centuries, as China expanded and shifted its power centers, the wall aged, crumbled, and was forgotten in stretches. Nature crept back. Vines tangled around stone. Winds swept away loose soil. Entire segments vanished under sand and time. But one truth never changed: when China felt unsafe, it looked to the wall. By the time the Ming dynasty took the throne in 1368, China was again under threat. The Mongol Empire, once powerful, now fractured, still sent raiding parties through the northern frontier. These weren't disorganized skirmishes. These were fast, brutal attacks that left villages in flames and borders in question. The Ming rulers, scarred by memories of Mongol domination during the Yuan dynasty, decided to act. This time, they wouldn't patch the past. They would rebuild better, smarter, stronger. Gone were the days of rammed earth alone. The Ming used bricks and stone, materials that resisted erosion, and stood firm against both nature and time. The process was ambitious, not just in scale but in engineering. They laid foundations, used lime mortar for bonding, and built drainage systems to prevent collapse. In mountainous areas, stones were cut to fit the jagged terrain. On flatlands, bricks were baked, stacked, and fused with mortar to create formidable barriers. And it wasn't just a wall. The Ming Wall was a complex military system. It included forts, garrison towns, arsenals, and hundreds of signal towers. Picture this: you're a soldier in a tower on a cold morning. A smudge of smoke rises on the horizon, an enemy raiding party. You light your signal fire. Miles away, another tower sees the smoke and repeats the message. Within hours, the entire frontier knows an attack is coming. It was a medieval form of texting, fast, effective, and life-saving. Construction under the Ming wasn't easier, though. It still demanded hundreds of thousands of workers, many of them unpaid laborers. The terrain hadn't changed, and neither had the suffering. Men died carrying bricks up mountains. Others froze in the winter winds or collapsed under summer heat. Yet unlike earlier eras, the Ming left behind detailed records. These documents list material costs, labor schedules, and strategic placement, showing just how meticulous the planners were. One of the most iconic Ming contributions was the Jiaguan Pass, a massive fortress at the wall's western edge. With double gates, battlements, and a moat, it was an architectural masterpiece. Travelers arriving there after crossing the desert saw not just a gate, but a statement. You are now entering China. It was equal parts protection and psychological warfare. Still, for all its brilliance, the wall had limits. Raiders sometimes found ways around it. Corrupt commanders could be bribed. And a wall, no matter how tall, couldn't stop betrayal from within. But the point wasn't perfection. The wall worked as a deterrent. It showed strength. It forced enemies to calculate. And it gave the people behind it a sense of security, however thin that security might be. During peacetime, the wall didn't fall silent. Soldiers still patrolled. Locals grazed cattle nearby. Traders moved through guarded passes, paying taxes and tolls. The wall wasn't just about war, it was part of everyday life. Entire communities lived in its shadow, its stones woven into their stories. And through it all, the wall grew. Bit by bit, brick by brick, the Ming extended it farther than any dynasty before. When you picture the Great Wall today, the wide, brick-clad spine twisting across mountaintops, you're mostly picturing the Ming version. Their craftsmanship, their sweat, their vision made it iconic. But even the strongest wall can't hold forever. The end was coming, not just for this grand construction phase, but for the very dynastic system that had fueled it. With the wall rebuilt under the Ming, China appeared fortified like never before. But a wall is only as strong as the men who defend it, and as stable as the empire that commands them. As the 16th century gave way to the 17th, the Ming dynasty faced mounting pressure, not just from the outside, but from within. Corruption festered, natural disasters wrecked harvests, and rebellions flared in the countryside. Yet at the northern frontier, the wall stood, its stones solid, its towers vigilant. Atop those towers, soldiers scanned the horizon. They weren't always the elite, many were farmers by birth, soldiers by circumstance. They lived in fortified garrisons, trained with spears and bows, and rotated shifts patrolling the wall's jagged length. Boredom was constant, so was fear. A clear morning could darken with the dust of hooves in minutes. Enemy raiders didn't knock, they struck. The greatest threat during this era wasn't the Mongols, but a new northern power, the Manchus. They were organized, disciplined, and ambitious. Unlike nomadic raiders, the Manchus sought to rule. They united tribes under a banner of conquest, pushing southward with intent. The Ming watched with growing unease. To counter the threat, the wall evolved again. Watchtowers rose taller. Beacon systems were upgraded to send more detailed alerts. Some towers even included storage for gunpowder, reflecting the growing role of firearms. Walls were reinforced near strategic passes, and double-layered defenses were added in places, creating kill zones where invading forces could be trapped between walls. Yet while defenses became more advanced, so did weaknesses. The wall's length, over 21,000 kilometers if you counted every branch, was both its pride and its burden. Too long to fully guard, too complex to easily repair. Patrols became thin. Supplies ran short. And worst of all, some commanders were underpaid and overtempted. In 1644, a fateful betrayal cracked open the empire. At Shanghai Pass, one of the wall's easternmost and most critical gates, General Wu Sangui faced a terrible dilemma. Rebel forces under Li Zicheng had captured Beijing. The Ming Emperor was dead. Rather than surrender to the rebels, Wu Sangui opened the gate to the advancing Manchu army. What began as defense became an invitation. The Manchus swept through the breach and into Chinese history, founding the Qing dynasty. Ironically, the wall, meant to keep invaders out, had played a key role in letting them in. But that didn't diminish its purpose. To many, it was still the backbone of China's might, even if its power now served a new ruler. Under Qing rule, the wall's military role faded. The Manchus didn't need a northern barrier, they were from the north. And so, much of the wall entered a long, slow decline. Garrison towns emptied. Bricks were stolen to build houses. Sections fell to ruin. Some locals barely knew what the wall had once meant. Still, not all activity stopped. In times of conflict, parts of the wall were rearmed. Travelers still passed through gates like Jiaiguan, leaving behind poems carved into stone. The wall remained a silent witness, standing through storms, snow, and centuries. It watched dynasties fall and factories rise. It watched emperors become stories, and stories become legends. By now, the wall was no longer just a military structure. It was a national symbol, growing larger in memory than it ever was in stone. Painters captured it snaking through misty mountains. Poets wrote of its endurance and sorrow. Foreign visitors gasped at its scale, often unaware of the lives it had claimed. And always, villagers lived in its shadow. Children played near collapsed towers. Farmers dug up old bricks. Some families believed their ancestors had built the wall, others believed they had died building it. Both were likely true. The wall may have been born of fear and hardened by war, but over centuries, it became something more, a silent, sprawling testament to ambition, sacrifice, and the stubborn will to shape the world. Centuries passed, and as China entered the modern era, the Great Wall began to slip into something like hibernation. The Qing dynasty ruled with confidence, and the days of desperate watchfulness at the frontier were over. For the emperors in Beijing, the wall no longer served a vital purpose. It was an old relic, fading into the mountains. But relics have power. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, China faced a different kind of threat, one not from northern raiders, but from gunboats, colonizers, and foreign trade powers. The British brought opium. The Japanese brought war. The world was changing fast, and the wall, once a marvel of defense, offered no help against steamships or cannons. Still, it stood. It stood when European explorers came with journals and cameras, marveling at its length and endurance. They walked along crumbling ridges, sketched fallen towers, and sent dispatches home with breathless descriptions. A wonder of the world, they called it, echoes of a phrase that would stick. Back in China, attitudes were more complicated. Some saw the wall as a symbol of outdated thinking, a monument to isolation. Others began to reclaim it, not for military pride, but as a national treasure. As wars and revolutions swept the country, the wall remained impartial, steady. It saw emperors fall, republics rise, and red flags unfurl. In 1949, the People's Republic of China was born. Chairman Mao famously said. He who has not climbed the Great Wall is not a true man. With that, the wall was reborn, not in battle, but in identity. Tourists, students, soldiers, all were encouraged to make pilgrimages to the most famous sections. It was not just a relic now. It was part of what made China, China. Yet not all of the wall shared in this revival. The sections we see in glossy photos, like Badaling and Nishianyu, were restored with bricks and tourist rails. But farther west, or deeper into the mountains, the wall tells a different story. There, it lies fractured, wind-battered, half swallowed by sand and shrubs. Goats climb over old battlements. Stones sink into the soil. Nature reclaims what ambition once claimed first. Even as preservation efforts grew, so did threats: erosion, illegal construction, careless tourism. Locals, short on materials, sometimes dismantled parts of the wall to build houses or roads. It was not malice, it was survival. And it raised a hard question: how do you protect a wall that spans nearly the length of the equator? Still, the wall endured. Not in its entirety, not in perfect form, but in spirit. Artists painted it winding through pink spring blossoms. Calligraphers inked it beside mountain poems. In films, it became the setting for legends and martial arts. It seeped into dreams, stories, national memory. And more than anything, the wall reminded people of what was possible when a civilization decided to draw a line, literally, and say, "This is ours." Whether to keep things in, or keep things out, is still debated. But the act of building it? That was undeniable. Today, drones capture footage of its serpent-like grace. Satellites trace its winding path. Schoolchildren still memorize poems written about its harsh winters and valiant builders. It is both history and myth, a monument that never stops shifting, just like the land it rests on. And as tourists climb its steps, sweating under the summer sun, it's easy to forget that beneath every brick lies a deeper layer: the human cost. The dreams, the grief, the toil. The empires that once commanded. The hands that once built. The silence it still keeps. The Great Wall doesn't shout. It never has. But it remembers. The Great Wall is easy to admire from afar, a ribbon of stone stitched across rugged peaks, bold and majestic. But to truly understand it, you have to walk it. Not just the polished parts teeming with tourists and flags, but the broken paths where the wall narrows to a spine of rubble, where weeds crawl over ancient bricks and wind whispers through forgotten towers. Up close, the wall feels different. It's not just a structure, it's a story etched in stone. Every uneven stair is a remnant of hurried hands. Every watchtower is a stage where a soldier once stood, waiting for smoke to rise on the horizon. The farther you go from the popular sites, the more personal it becomes. You start to feel not like a visitor, but a witness. And what are we witnessing? We're witnessing one of humanity's longest, most determined attempts to draw a line, not just on land, but in the sand of time. The Great Wall wasn't built by a single emperor, or even a single dynasty. It was shaped across centuries, by fear, by pride, by stubborn hope. It's less a wall than it is a palimpsest of ambition, where every layer of stone overlays a different era, a different reason, a different face. The earliest builders likely didn't know what they were part of. They were digging ditches, carrying baskets of earth, hammering poles into dry ground. Some were criminals, others peasants, still others soldiers working off punishment. To them, it wasn't history. It was a sentence. Yet they built it anyway. One layer after another. One torch lit after another. And over time, the wall became more than just defense. It became a canvas, a backdrop to China's evolving identity. It inspired poetry in the Tang dynasty, war songs in the Ming, and nationalist slogans in the 20th century. It is both armor and artifact. Both wound and scar. It is also deeply human. Consider the myths. Meng Jiangnu, the woman whose tears brought down a wall. General Qin Shi Huang, who redefined the wall's strategy with iron discipline. The nameless builders whose bones may still lie beneath the stones. These stories echo louder than any trumpet call. They turn cold stone into warm memory. And what does it say that even after its military use faded, the wall was never abandoned in people's minds? The wall persisted, through dynastic collapse, foreign invasion, and revolution. And now, in the 21st century, it's being reclaimed yet again, this time as a global symbol. For unity. For endurance. For the unbelievable things people can build when they're afraid, and when they believe. It appears in textbooks, travel blogs, drone reels. It anchors the national psyche. Chinese astronauts have spoken of it with pride. Tour guides speak of it with reverence. Environmentalists warn of its erosion. Yet still it draws people, from every continent, from every walk of life. Because deep down, we all understand walls. We build them in our cities, our homes, our minds. We understand fear. We understand the desire to mark a boundary, to say, "This is where we begin, and where danger ends." The Great Wall, more than anything, teaches us how complicated those boundaries are. It asks questions as much as it provides answers. What were we protecting? Who were we excluding? What did we lose while trying to keep others out? These questions echo louder than any preserved tower. And maybe that's why, even in its ruined sections, the wall still matters. Not for what it blocks, but for what it reveals. And so it lies there, twisting, cracking, enduring. A marvel of grit. A relic of power. A witness to dreams both broken and fulfilled. The Great Wall of China may not keep out invaders anymore. But it keeps holding our gaze. And maybe that's enough.